Welcome to Quantum Healthy. Today we have a very special guest who is actually from England, but is currently in LA talking to us today. And it's Dr. Sarah Turner. She has a postgraduate degree in clinical neuroscience and has BSc degrees, not just one, several in psychological sciences and nutritional medicine, and is currently pursuing, my understanding, a very new diploma in photo, which is what we're going to talk about today, at the University of Montpellier in France. She has a keen interest in quantum biology, specifically in health, photomedicine, and consciousness studies. Very interesting. Sarah's primary focus lies in photobiomodulation, which you'll hear us in this podcast, we may say PBM for short, which involves utilizing specific light wavelengths and pulsed frequencies to enhance optimal functioning, with, in Sarah's case, a specific emphasis on brain-related issues. That's the formal intro. Please let us know if we missed anything, Sarah. But on a personal side, just want to share that we met you for the first time at a live presentation that you did for the Quantum Biology Collective. It's a practitioner group for graduates of the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology. And you introduced us to this invention called CeraThrive. It's not Sarah like her name, although it sounds the same. It's CERA, called CeraThrive. And for Laura's side, I've been a longtime fan of your own co-hosted podcast, the Rebel Scientist. And in fact, I just want to share on a personal note from Andia and I, the Rebel Scientist was actually one of the inspirations for our own Quantum Healthy podcast. And the reason for that is that I can still remember the moment I heard you say that you and Russ, your co-host, you'd never met in person. And I was so shocked. Oh my gosh, how could they start a whole podcast and have never met? And he was living, I believe does he live in California?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And you're in the UK, whereabouts?
I spend a lot of time in Bournemouth, which is on the south
Yes.
coast in
I
England.
love Bournemouth. Yeah, I used to live in Salisbury for a year. My husband did test pilot school there. We used to visit Bournemouth on his motorbike and go to the beach. Yeah, and see the ocean. Anyways, so Andia and I both live in different countries. We're probably, we have never done the math, Andia, but I think we're over 20 years apart, probably in age. And we've never met.
Maybe about.
Yeah. And we've never met in person. And it just shows us the power of quantum entanglement and what following your knowing can manifest. Because
Yes.
here we all are. So
yeah, that's lovely. Yes, thank you for that introduction. And yes, that's lovely. Yeah, the Rebel Scientist was kind of a lockdown project. So
was it?
Yeah, I didn't meet Russ until probably like a year later. And we meet a few times now. We meet like every 6 months. He recently came to London. So yes, you're right. It's kind of a blessing and a curse, this technology that we have. You kind of are a little bit glued to these screens, but at the same time, you make these wonderful connections.
Yes. And yeah, let's hope, Andia, that we will meet one day. We got to make this happen.
We will.
We will. So Sarah, we're gonna talk about red light therapy, photobiomodulation, and really specifically CeraThrive today, because the world really needs to know about this, because it affects the brain and specifically neurodegenerative disorders. So we all know, we all have people in our lives that have got a form of dementia, or we know somebody with Parkinson's, or may know of somebody with ALS, for example. I'm just thinking of the ones off the top of my head, Huntington's. But before we really get to that, and we want to do some background a little bit on red light therapy too, we just get to that, the science behind the technology. We just really want to ask you a little bit about, how did you go from, I understand you were in the pharmaceutical industry doing research as a research scientist. How did you come to become what I would call a quantum biologist, an inventor, and a podcaster? So basically, like, what is your story that got you here, and what drives you? And I've heard somebody, I don't know if you've called yourself this or somebody else, that you're brain health obsessive. So
yes.
Could you tell us how you've become all of this?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, you're right. I did start out as a research scientist for the pharmaceutical companies. I went to a number of different companies. Probably my longest stint was at GlaxoSmithKline. And there I was in the task force, because they have a big research obviously they have a big research department at GlaxoSmithKline. And really I was looking at problems and how to problem solve. And one of the problems that they had was that the inhaled drugs that they were producing were having an effect on some people and not on others. And it was mainly due to the plastic that they used in the inhalers that it created a static charge. So I was doing a lot of studies where I was grounded and not grounded. I was wearing a lab coat with metal thread. I was wearing rubber boots. I was, kind of putting this drug into an artificial lung, looking at the different depositions of the fine particles in the different layers of the kind of pseudo lung, if you like. And really what we found was that it very much depends on the static charge contained within the person, how the drug deposits in the lungs. So really a simple remedy for this is to ground the person. Because if you ground the person, you remove the static charge. We all know that grounding, you pick up electrons from the earth, the lungs are functioning better, the person is functioning more optimally. And in this way, you could potentially reduce the amount of drug that's needed for that condition. And actually, maybe over a long time, who knows, maybe you could negate the use for some of these drugs. And that's what really got me started looking at the person rather than looking at what we can give the person. Is this whole kind of terrain theory. Instead of treating the fish that's sick, you kind of clean out its water bowl and the fish gets better. So, but obviously Glaxo, that's not their MO. They're more looking at, so in the end, we just made a plastic that wasn't static and solved that problem. But that really got me thinking more about, okay, what can we do with the person to increase health rather than the other way around? So I kind of left that position and I started studying nutritional medicine, because I thought from that way we can more influence the state of the person. But it kind of didn't really go all the way, because even with nutrition, it's all about your state of mind also. And I was doing a lot of nutrition consults with people who had quite difficult psychological reasons for maybe staying in a certain mode of being that they didn't really want to address. And, kind of trying to deal with that with nutrition is not really effective.
Yeah.
I started studying more brain sciences. So as you've mentioned in your lovely intro, I had a master's in neuroscience, because I started to look more about, okay, what is actually going on in people's brains, or, in our cognition, or the way that we are thinking about ourselves and the world, that is also influencing health. So that set me off down the whole kind of way of looking at, it used to be called alternative health. Now it's more biohacking or longevity or all these other names, but really it's different ways of looking at health that are outside of the mainstream.
Okay. So so obviously the interest in red light therapy, where did that start?
Yes. So all of that, my kind of alternative health studies brought me over to California. So I was living in Santa Cruz, California, and working for a company that was looking at consciousness interface devices. So kind of very fringe technology. Very interesting, but also that's when all the biohacking started to kick off. So, the start of the Dave Asprey conferences, and Dr. Jack Kruse was just kind of getting his message out there. So I started looking actually at structured water before I was looking at anything else, because structured water is all to do with how light interacts with biology. So I started doing some research into structured water. I went and interviewed Professor Jerry Pollack and Luc Montagnier.
You're ahead of your time.
Well, yeah,
Wow.
and
Wow.
even Fritz Albert Pop, all of these characters, because this was quite a long time before people really started paying attention. But it became clear to me that there was definitely something in the structured water. And I do have a lot of science qualifications, and never once was any of that mentioned to me in the course of that whole, academic career, really.
Is it true that you interviewed Mei Wan Ho as well? Did you?
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, she lived in North London at the time, so very close to where I lived. I went and visited her at home. She had fantastic art studio, she showed me. And I did 2 interviews with Mei Wan. Of course, fascinating scientist. And really, if anybody hasn't read her books, especially The Rainbow Worm, which is probably her best book, very interesting about quantum coherent domains in water. Highly technical. She was very technical. It was actually quite difficult to kind of bring her down to a kind of lay level. So I've got a lot of footage of her actually, but a lot of it is difficult to put out. I have put it out in various places, because she was super intelligent, super technical. And what she was doing, she was way ahead of her time. Unfortunately, as you know, she's passed away now, but definitely what her legacy is, all of those papers where she was exploring the quantum nature of particularly water, but also organisms. So her book, that the Rainbow in the Worm, is about her studies to look at using different kinds of analysis. She used like a SPECT camera, using different kinds of magnetic resonances to look at the organism and see how everything is kind of nested, stacked kind of quantum effects. And she called it quantum jazz, you know, because you can't, it's not kind of it's not really an orchestra because there's no conductor, really. It's kind of like jazz where everyone's living and jamming together and making this kind of amazing melody that is, you know, how we're constantly creating life.
I've got her, it's her other book, not The Rainbow and the Worm. I forget what the title. And I've brought it on holidays, and every time I open it, I think, oh, this is too heavy. I don't want to think this much.
Rainbow H2O.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have them both behind me. Yes, Laura, for those listening, yes, that you need an understanding of some things before you can digest that.
Okay. I'm just wondering should I start with Rainbow and the Worm? Did I pick the wrong book?
Oh yeah, maybe we should start with that one.
Well,
I can't remember which one I was reading, but I was like, oh geez, I'm gonna study a little bit more.
I know. And I have a physics degree. This shouldn't be hard. But...
I'm wondering if you've both read The Fourth Phase Water by...
Yes.
Because that is a very good kind of intro book to the topic.
It really is. It's so pictographic. Is that the word? It's got so many images. Yeah, it's wonderful. Everybody should read that book.
Yes, thanks for mentioning that.
Yes.
You use the term biohacking, and I can't remember right now who said it, but someone said the term bioharmonizing. Yes. And I really think that's what this work is that we've been sharing on the podcast, and guests like you have been sharing. In the mainstream, it is called biohacking, but we're not really hacking. We are harmonizing our systems so they work with nature as they are supposed to work. So I wanted to just point that out for our listeners that, anyway.
Maybe to get that quantum jazz.
And the quantum jazz. When you mentioned that, I was like, oh, no, I have to say something.
I have not heard that term, Andy. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's exciting.
Well, I'll make sure I give credit where credit is due as soon as I remember who I heard it from.
Different people try, because it is, and it's a very masculine term, you know, biohacking. It sounds awful. You're chopping something up. But people are using all different terms now, like life spanning or health spanning.
Health spanning,
harmonizing. Yeah, there are different kinds of, but you're right. Biohacking is a much more appropriate word.
Okay, well, let's take us in this bioharmonizing back to red light therapy. Can you tell us about, in your mind, what red light therapy is? Is it the same as, and in your definition, is it the same as photobiomodulation? And do those two cover the same part of the spectrum?
Yeah, so let me clarify that then, because it's really to do with the change of technology. So prior to, I suppose, 1980, we didn't have LEDs. And so all the work that was done was using laser technology. So the terminology that was used was cold laser therapy or low-level laser therapy or just laser therapy. But now we have LEDs, and LEDs have actually advanced hugely and are now just as efficacious, if not more so, than laser for this application. So the regulatory bodies, and the one that I follow mostly is WALT, which is the World Association of Laser Therapists, changed the terminology to be photobiomodulation because it encompasses the use of LED.
Okay.
So photobiomodulation covers all kinds of light therapy, ranging from UV light right up to near infrared. So that's really the definition of photobiomodulation. Okay. And then red light therapy is a subset of photobiomodulation where you're just using red and near infrared light.
Okay, which CeraThrive is doing.
CeraThrive, yes, we're
your
using
invention.
Just the red spectrum. So it's still a little bit confusing because when we say red, we're also incorporating this slightly longer wavelength, which is invisible to the human eye, which is near infrared. But we're not talking about far infrared. We're not talking about infrared sauna.
No.
Talking about is near infrared, and in photobiomodulation currently they go up to 1200 nanometers. Now, that's really just the limitation of the research we've got. It's not necessarily to say that that's the limitation of red light therapy. It's just right now, we definitely know that red light therapy has an effect from around 600 to 1200 nanometers in what the length of the wave. So we call that the wavelength, and the wavelength dictates the color.
Ah, okay. Yeah. And then we'll get into the details on CeraThrive, what exact wavelengths in a second, but the purpose of red light therapy, and PBM is, in your words, is to trigger the body's innate healing potential. I stole that from the quantum biology collective that you talk that you did, and in doing so, what is it targeting? What are the effects in the body, I guess?
Yeah, so really, I think a lot of this comes from just the way that we're living right now. And if you just have to think about how our whole evolution, 200,000 years of living under the sun, we're diurnal mammals that have lived under the sun, 200,000 years of this evolution to get where we are today. And really, for the last 200 years, we've kind of put that on its head, and we now live indoor lives. But our bodies, we can't adapt that quickly. So we still have these bodies that really are totally programmed to be outside under natural light. So the longer wavelengths, when I say longer, I'm talking about this red and near infrared light, we see at sunrise and sunset, because that's when we get the exposure of, that's when we have a certain angle of the sun that we get these long wavelengths penetrate so that we can receive them. And really that triggers a whole cascade of reactions in the human body, well, any mammal body, that sets us up for the day and also initiates those innate healing programs. The same when the sun goes down, we initiate innate healing programs to enable us to rest and rejuvenate during the night so we're ready for another day. So I think really what red light therapy is doing is just replacing those missing wavelengths. I see it kind of, people can be deficient in vitamin D, you can be deficient in vitamin C, you can also be deficient in these long wavelengths of light. So really what we're doing with red light therapy is correcting a deficiency, the same as with any other supplement.
Yes. Oh, wow. So glad you explained it that way. I hadn't really thought about that. Okay. So let's talk about the mechanisms that red light therapy, how it works on the body. I guess we'll get into a little bit more of the science here with the mitochondria. And I think I told you earlier, our audience is just kind of, they've heard the term electron transport chain, they've heard the term mitochondria, they have not heard the term cytochrome C oxidase. But I think I want you to go there because I think people need to understand to that level. And so could you explain what a cytochrome is? And as simply as you can, as a PhD can, and dumb this down for us, but at the same time, help people to understand why red. Why is it red? It's not blue light therapy. You know what I mean?
Yes. So I think people can maybe get their head around the fact that the body produces energy and it forms energy molecules that enable us to do work within the body. And the way that our bodies do that is a very small organelle that's contained within all cells. It's most present in cells where you need a lot of energy, so big muscles, heart, brain, and it's called the mitochondria. So this is a very small organelle, and it's stimulated to produce our energy molecule. So we eat food, that food gets processed into electrons, into kind of fundamental particles, and then we produce energy for our body to use. And, that's kind of how we energize our bodies. It's a chemical process. Mm-hmm. So, well, I'm going to explain to you it's more of a biophysics chemical process, but what happens with red light is red light penetrates into the body, and actually the body is fairly transparent to near infrared. I mean, I think people realize it, if you kind of in a tent and you kind of have a red light and you put your hand over it, you can start to see it through some of your hand. Yes. And certainly the longer the wavelength, it's going to penetrate quite deep into the body.
Right,
and
that's important to know.
And so the body picks up this light. One of the ways it picks it up is it stimulates the mitochondria. Now, within the mitochondria, there is what we call an electron transport chain. And this really means how we're passing charge through the membrane of the mitochondria to produce this energy molecule, ATP. So when people are talking about cytochrome C oxidase, it's one of the enzymes in that electron transport chain. And because of the structure of the enzyme, it resonates, or it gets stimulated by light. So really what's happening is you have an enzyme or a protein within the mitochondria that is stimulated by light. So when light goes straight through the body and lands on the mitochondria, it becomes stimulated and you produce more energy. So in a very simplistic way, light is directly producing energy in the body. And probably that's responsible for a lot of the effects of red light therapies. Your body just has a lot more energy. And when your body has energy, it can you can have a healing reaction or anything that you want to do where you require energy in the body, make new cells, produce more synapses, whatever it is the body wants to do, that it needs the energy to do that. In addition to that, the way that I kind of got into it with this whole thing about structured water is when you shine light onto, well, they call it a hydrophilic surface. It just means water-loving surface, like you would find in any cell membrane. You can also cause a change in structure of the water. Right. And this forms a different layer of water within the body. We call it EZ water or exclusion zone water or gel phase water. And this means that everything becomes more lubricated. So things like the little motor where you're making ATP, it spins a lot faster because, you now have this lubricated water around it. Proteins can fold easier because they're more able to kind of link up with charges. So you have two different effects of photobiomodulation, in my opinion. One is to stimulate the cytochrome C oxidase, so you get a lot more ATP. And the second one is you charge the water, and so you have this effect of a more viscous water layer. But in order to charge water, you need different wavelengths for each of these things. So red light and near infrared will target the mitochondria. If you go a little bit longer wave, so above 900 nanometers, then water starts to absorb the light also.
So in the thousands, like the wavelength?
Yeah, above 900 nanometers, water absorbs a lot of the light. So most devices that you see, interestingly, they stop at 850.
They usually do. Yeah.
Well, they don't want water to absorb the light because that could be light that's used for the mitochondria. But in my device, I do go above 900 because I want the water to absorb the light, because I think that's probably one of the mechanisms.
But because the brain is so full of water?
Because the brain is mostly water, right? The body is, by far molecular way, it really just is water.
Right.
And, or 70% water if you're kind of doing it by volume. So for sure, I think that is an effect. But cytochrome C oxidase is the most studied and most researched and accepted way that light is working. So most people are kind of sticking to that as the main mechanism.
Okay. I've got a number of questions on this. I think you answered so many of them. Oh, just that. So red light hitting this fourth enzyme in the chain, there's like 5 in the chain, right? And the last one is the energy, the ATPase. But the fourth one is this cytochrome. So it's a cytochrome. It is a chromophore, right? Is a protein that absorbs red light. Okay.
It's a chemical. So the clue there is kind of in the title, because chroma always means color. And where you've got the color, then you have this resonance with light. So it's all to do with kind of the metals that are within this enzyme, how it kind of oscillates with light in order to be stimulated to have this effect.
It's all physics. Okay.
It's all physics. And this is the most interesting thing. And why I think I was never taught this in all of my science degrees is because physics and chemistry and biology tend to keep separate.
Yes.
And we are very much living in a biological, chemical mindset with regards to how we think things are working in our body. And I think it's because quantum physics hasn't been around that long. And also, it's very hard and people are not really talking to each other about these different things because, all the textbooks have been written. We know lock and key mechanisms. We kind of know how biology works from a chemical point of view, but actually light is a physical process. And so we really do need to get into more of a physics mindset when we're thinking about these things, because it's all to do with redox reactions. And by that, I just mean transfer of electrons, transfer of these fundamental particles that are, again, an abstraction, because, of course, as humans, we have to kind of categorize things. It's more just like spinning energy. So I think very difficult for our human minds to get a handle on, but thinking more in terms of physics than chemistry is a better way to get a grasp on what's actually happening when we're thinking about light interacting with the body.
And in
Would it
in
be
each,
safe to, oh, sorry.
in each of the, just before we leave this, for the respiratory proteins, are all of them chromophores and then they just absorb certain types of light, or is it only the cytochrome C oxidase that is a chromophore that's absorbing red light?
No, there's more cytochromes there. And actually, before you even get to the respiratory chain, there are FAD and NAD and FADH. And all of these things are potentially oscillating with light in certain ways, but it's specifically cytochrome C oxidase that's absorbing the red light. It's very specifically that one enzyme. But of course, yeah, and anything that's got an aromatic ring structure, which is most of these molecules we're talking about, will resonate with light to some degree, and with different wavelengths of light. So it's very interesting. We're kind of zooming in on one particular enzyme, but there are probably multiple mechanisms for how light is affecting the body. It's just that this mechanism that I'm talking about now with cytochrome C oxidase is the most researched of all the mechanisms. And we know that's the main receiver of certainly red and near infrared light. But there are other molecules, like I say, that are probably even on different scales that we're maybe not even measuring, but that are having these subtle quantum effects. Yeah, for sure. All of the molecules, that have this ring structure are in some way having some effect on what's going on in the body. We just, the research on this is still fairly young with regards to integrating our knowledge of quantum biology into these small processes.
So again, just to finish on cytochrome C oxidase, because we're formulating our understanding here too. It makes water, is that right? Which then helps to make more energy, and then does it make reactive oxygen species and increase the signaling in the body? Is it, if it does that?
So what happens, it's a chain reaction of like I say, of mainly of electrons kind of swapping around and doing their thing. And what happens with cytochrome C oxidase is you have a dissociation of nitric oxide, which just means it's kind of knocked off the way that it interacts with that enzyme. So you have a production of water in the whole reaction. You have a release of nitric oxide, very transient release, and nitric oxide is a gas. So what happens with nitric oxide is it dilates the blood vessels within that direct area. So you have, which is another mechanism, because all of a sudden you have greater blood flow to the area where you've put the light, which of course, if you're talking about any kind of pain or anything going on with the brain, the more you can provide oxygenated blood and remove toxins, that's going to help hugely. And then these reactive oxygen species, again, this is very interesting because yes, you have production of reactive oxygen species. Now, this is what, these are oxidants, we talk about we need antioxidants because oxidants are bad, but actually these reactive oxygen species are probably involved in cell signaling. It's not that all oxidants are bad, actually. We kind of get a bit like hung up on, okay, we need to have antioxidants because these things are like free radicals damaging the cell.
Yes.
Potentially, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It just depends on the amount and where they are in the cell and what they're doing. And probably the reactive oxygen species that you have produced as a byproduct of red light therapy are signaling to the cellular DNA, what's going on, and, the cell is receiving light. Now it's time to heal. There's different messages that are probably being transferred around the body using reactive oxygen species. But of course, if you produce too many, potentially it's detrimental. So I think this is one of the reasons why you have a biphasic response with red light. By biphasic, what I mean is too little red light and you don't do anything, too much and you can negate the effect. And I think what's happening is if you really, really overdo the red light therapy, and we'll talk about how you could overdo that, but if you did that, then you produce reactive oxygen species that actually negate the effect. I mean, I've not seen any evidence that it causes a side effect, but it certainly may make it, less efficacious. But actually, all of the devices, that are out there, the panels we spoke about earlier, my device, you really would have to use them all day long to kind of get to that point.
Okay, that makes me feel better because I have some of those panels and I worry. I think, oh, am I using it too much?
But there is such a thing as too much, and it's good for people to know, you don't really want to be sitting in front of these things for hours.
No.
I'm glad you said that because people who listen to this are in addiction recovery, and so am I. And when we hear, oh, 20 minutes is good, well, an hour must be really good. Like, that's just kind of where people's minds go. So I'm always making sure I'm very like, don't do it more than that, even though you think it's going to help. So I'm glad you're clarifying the science behind why we wouldn't want to overdo it.
Yes, for sure. And also, it's not always the case is more is better, as we just said, but some of the quantum effects, I mean, I don't know if you've read the book Life on the Edge, which is Jim Al-Khalili and John J.
No, I should. Yeah.
It's a very interesting book because they
Okay.
talk about how enzymes work. And actually what the body is trying to do is utilize the least energy possible to have a biological effect. So actually, when you're doing things like these energy therapies or, therapies where you're providing energy, you may only need a small amount of energy to have that effect. You really don't need to kind of have like a massive hammer to crack a walnut. You need to I think it's something that's a little bit counterintuitive. It goes with the whole biohacking thing. A lot of people want more power, excuse me. But actually, I think from a quantum point of view, sometimes it's just a little nudge that the body needs to get back into that space.
Almost like acupuncture. It's this tiny, tiny needle, just this. I had a little bit yesterday, so it's making me think of. Okay, I think we have a pretty good understanding of red light therapy, and maybe we'll bring back more on the water side as we get into the brain. But first of all, just what is CeraThrive, this invention? Can you tell us? And then we'll get in. I really want to start with talk about the headband and the brain.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I was kind of in California doing some study on light therapy. And then I was like, yeah, this is interesting, but why are we kind of structuring water? Why aren't we structuring the body? And of course, I wasn't the first person to have that thought. And there were people with some pretty interesting research into particularly brain photobiomodulation. So I was able to get on a trial actually looking at Parkinson's disease because I wanted to know if it worked. Can you actually shine light onto people's brains and change these conditions? Because it does sound a bit out there when you kind of think about it. And so I went and did a study with Quiet Mind and Baylor Scott and White. And yeah, they were using a big helmet and they were looking at Parkinson's disease, and they were using this longer wavelength near infrared. And I can see for myself, it was very clear that it was working. But the device was very cumbersome. And I was kind of thinking, why haven't we got like little devices? Because if this works so well and people can potentially get off their drugs or at least have a better quality of life, it should be something that's simple and easy. And so I went and worked for various companies. And in the end, I took my idea to a Dutch company that are a manufacturer. And so they've made this device that we kind of worked on together. And it's a simple headband to make it really consumer friendly and something that people can do easily. It's got a battery. You don't have to be kind of sat next to a wall. But there are certain criteria that are needed in order for it to be efficacious for the brain. So you do need to have it flush against the head. You do need to have it contoured to the head. You do need to have it a certain power so that you're getting photons onto the brain. I also wanted to have a gut panel to go with it because having been in alternative medicine for a long time, I was acutely aware of how your gut health influences brain health. And especially for these neurodegenerative conditions, I was kind of interested in looking at that. And I went to a fascinating talk by a company called Regen Health, who presented some mouse data actually on a mouse Alzheimer model. And they showed that if you shine light into the brain of these rodents, you get an effect which, you see a reduction in mouse Alzheimer symptoms. The same as if you shine it on the gut. If you do both together, you get this increased and synergistic effect. So that's what I was thinking. Yeah, and I mean, intuitively, we know, I also had IBS at the time, and it was like, okay, this is interfering with, my ability to focus and concentrate.
Yeah, like I always like to go to that. If I eat too much sugar, or just too many grains, or I get brain fog.
Yeah. And I think now, I mean, if you ask anybody, everybody's got gut symptoms now. I think we're kind of living in a world where it's very difficult to avoid environmental toxins and all kinds of strange things in our food and artificial light and Wi-Fi and the rest of it. So I think most people struggle now with gut health. And that's going to lead to an epidemic of brain health, because that, it's really, they say the gut is the second brain. It's probably more like the first brain. I mean, certainly from an embryology point of view, your gut forms first and then your brain. And I think you have more signals going from your gut to your brain, more neurotissue, more neurotransmitters. So I wanted to focus also on gut health. So CeraThrive is a very simple technology, really. It's a gut panel with red and near infrared, and then it's a headband with red and near infrared in these longer wavelengths, so like a multiple of wavelengths. And also because you can entrain brainwave frequencies just by turning light off and on. It's a very, very simple, people talk about gamma frequency, which is this 40 hertz, which gets you into an alert state. Well, you can induce that gamma frequency just by pulsing light at 40 hertz. So that's another thing that I have in the headband, just the ability not only to get the light onto your head to give you more energy, but also some entrainment is there too. Just very simple, a 10 hertz, a 40 hertz. I also have 100 hertz brainwave entrainment.
And you wear these at the person when we wear them at the same time?
Yeah, so the gut and brain at the same time. Yeah, I mean, that's potentially, maybe you could do them at different times, but to me it makes sense. It also, enables you to make a kind of psychological connection. But I think also it's 10 minutes. Why not do it together? It's very easy. It's really simply just a pad that you put over the body and a headband that you put on. And I think it also helps that connection. We're connected. Our gut and brain is connected via our blood, via everything else, but also via our vagus nerve, which is a nerve that kind of goes all over the body, but it also travels to the gut and up to the brain. And it's the way that we get a lot of messages going, mostly from our gut to our brain. So to me, to do both at the same time is probably going to give you the best chance of having healing and having it, at a faster pace.
One thing I think you've mentioned, but I just would like to talk a little bit longer about it, is how difficult is it to get light to the brain because of the skull? And do you have to use a longer wavelength?
You have to use near infrared because red light won't penetrate more than superficial. So you do need to use near infrared. So whether you use 850 or, like I say, in my device, I use 850, 940 and 1070, but you do need a longer wavelength. But actually, you can, the skull is fairly transparent to near infrared. You won't get a lot of light onto the brain. But as I was mentioning, if you've got all of these different quantum effects going on, you don't need to have a lot of light. So whatever you've got coming out of your device, probably only 3% of that light is actually getting onto the surface of the brain. Yeah, wow. It's a small amount.
Wow.
But we know from studies that it has an effect. I mean, there are probably 3,000 studies on this now, where there is a significant effect of shining light onto the brain to have a biochemical effect or have some kind of biological effect. But yes, it isn't easy. And so that's why you won't really do it if you have a panel. Like standing in front of a panel, you won't get anything going onto your brain because you do really have to push it up against the head. You do need a longer wavelength and you need a certain power output. So my device, for example, is 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared. I think you need something within that range. Mine equates to 30 joules per centimeter squared. Hamblin, who's maybe written the most papers on this, suggests anything between 3 and 70 joules per centimeter squared for a brain health application.
Okay.
Since you mentioned research, I actually have I've read a bunch of research about photobiomodulation and addiction. It's very promising. Things coming up are the reduction of cravings for people who use opiates and also decrease in the depression. In one study, they did find that it was actually more effective than cognitive rehab to lower cravings. The cognitive rehab helped, but overall it was actually more effective. And then also an adjunct treatment for alcoholism. So just wanted you to mention maybe any research that sticks out to you in the addiction realm.
Well, it's really interesting because last month I was in London for PBM 24, which is the biggest photobiomodulation conference. It's a yearly conference. All of the top people in the industry are at this event. And there was a lot of studies looking at, for example, opiate addiction. And there was some studies that had been done looking at the efficacy for opiate addiction, and in particular, the ability of photobiomodulation to help with neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. So it's, once you've even once you've gone through some kind of treatment program, it's the ability to actually rewire the brain to kind of not go down the same path. And they had some amazing studies. And in fact, they were showing that they're going to start using it in various addiction clinics in the States because of the results they'd had there. I mean, I know Michael Hamblin, who I just mentioned with brain photobiomodulation. I know he has a review paper also on the use of PBM for different kinds of addictions. And he wasn't even kind of saying which addictions, because really what he's talking about is neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, and neuroplasticity. So that's really for any kind of addiction. This is the way that the brain is kind of getting molded with addictions, is that you kind of go down one pathway because the brain becomes less plastic. So he was talking about how you can kind of open up the plasticity of the brain again, and then that helps with any kind of addiction or any kind of obsessive compulsive, or anything where you have that kind of limitation on the ability to kind of make new neural pathways. So from that point of view, I think, that was amazing research that was happening, and really very interesting, because it's something different to what we would usually think of, basically using light. It's non-toxic, it's non-invasive, it's easy to do, and it's helping people. So yeah, that was great. That was really great. I was in a few lectures on that in London a few weeks ago.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing that. It made my day. I'm gonna have to dive into what you were listening to.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll
probably be able to get you the papers, because, like I say, it was academic study. This wasn't people giving anecdotal results. This was, proper academic study that's happening on these different kinds of issues.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Let's talk about like more neurological diseases in terms of the CeraThrive. Is it targeted for anything specific, like for Parkinson's, for Alzheimer's?
Yep. So
or mental health, or
there is no FDA or European directive, or any other country for that matter, photobiomodulation and a brain health application at the moment. So there's brilliant research happening, but at the moment, the research hasn't reached a level where it's accepted by the authorities for a health claim to be made. So none of the companies, including myself, can make any kind of health claim on. We can really only go from taking the person from where they are to better. So, we can't talk about Alzheimer's, but we can talk about better memory, better sleep, better cognitive function.
better focus.
Libido, all of these things that are the symptoms of those conditions, but we can't talk about treating or curing or preventing or diagnosing those conditions. Yeah. So I'll just put that caveat there.
Yeah.
I will say in research, they are starting to get great results, particularly for neurodegeneration. Like I said, I was involved in a study on Parkinson's, but there's now been lots of studies published on Alzheimer's. Anecdotally, I have a case study of a guy who's got ALS.
Oh, I was so hoping you're going to mention Seb.
Yes, we're in constant communication now. He really attributes his improvements that he's made recently to red light therapy. So he's a great advocate. He's now making his own device. I went and visited him recently. He's kind of made a cap where he's put in his own LEDs. He's been using the CeraThrive, and he's been able to stand for the first time in 4.5 years just by. He's made a few changes to his diet. He does use a little bit of methylene blue. So, there are little things, he's kind of stacking his hacks, but certainly it's come from 6 months of regular use of light therapy where he feels like he's made the most gains.
I want to say it was 6 months ago that you did your talk with us, and you showed us a video of him. It was his first time standing, and it was incredible.
It's very interesting, and he was kind enough to put that video on his Facebook. And so now I have a small cohort of people with, we call it motor neuron disease, but ALS, who have now bought the CeraThrive device that I'm able to kind of monitor and coach and see how they're getting on, because it would be extremely interesting to see how long it takes and what kind of things people are reporting with these kinds of fairly, they're fairly incalcitrant illnesses with no drug, there's no pharmaceutical intervention available really.
Well, one question I wasn't going to ask you, but I will now. Like, 'cause he's got that variable, he's adding in the methylene blue,
Yep.
I guess more recently, but do you see that as a positive because some people are pairing red light therapy with methylene blue and seeing greater effects? Are you going to be looking at that with CeraThrive?
I'm looking at it. I've been trying it on myself. I'm still looking at it because it also it is kind of a drug. There's pluses and minuses for using methylene blue.
Yes.
It's an electron recycler, methylene blue.
Okay.
So it does pair well with red light therapy. I just need to do a bit more research to make sure that there's not gastro issues because I'm so much about the gut. I don't want to.
Right.
Because potentially, it's antibacterial too, and whether that affects your good bacteria and bad, I need to do a little bit more research. That's actually something that's on my to-do list. I'm actually talking about red light and methylene blue in a panel at the Women's Week next week, so I have to kind of really get it in my head very clear. But I am a little bit sparing with methylene blue for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
But Seb has been using it, and he subjectively reports that he does feel a bit sharper when he combines the both. And it makes sense because, somebody who has neurodegeneration in the way that he does, his mitochondria maybe need that extra.
Right.
So whether or not it's good for everyone to use or whether we're going to find it small cohorts with certain conditions that benefit from methylene blue, I don't know. But it's an interesting combination because you're having methylene blue recycles electrons. So if the red light, you're not getting enough electrons, it will add electrons. And if the red light is kind of producing too much of those reactive oxygen species I spoke about, the methylene blue can mop them up. So potentially it's a good pairing. It's just whether or not there is, on the other side of the scale, whether there's something that you need to think about with regard to gut bacteria. But maybe I'll have to come back to you on that. That is something, and next week I'm in a whole group with all kinds of experts on this where I will kind of get to speak about it. But
I first heard about it from BioLite, the CEO of BioLite, Mike Belkowski on his, he's been talking about it on his podcast, The Red Light Report. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very knowledgeable and I'm sure he's done his research. And yeah, I think it is a good pairing. Like I say, I'm very sparing with anything that's not something in nature.
Yes, and I've heard that about methylene blue, that not everybody needs it.
Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's good to do some self-experimentation, but it's not something that we would naturally have around us, whereas red light is, red light is directly mimicking sunlight. So I tend to stick to
nature.
You would find it in nature because really I think that's what we're doing with all this bioharmonizing is we're trying to get back to natural state so that our bodies can actually live in this strange artificial world that we've put ourselves in. As much as we can do to mimic that natural state, I think we will be in a better place.
Could we go to the gut a bit more now? So we've talked about the headband and you've mentioned briefly this belly band. I think I heard you use this term. I've never heard it before. Photobiomics.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is? And is that really what the belly band is doing?
Yeah, that was a term coined by Dr. Anne Lieber and her colleagues in Sydney University. Okay. She's done a lot of studies on photobiomics. So it's the way that light interacts with our bacteria. And it's very interesting for sure, but because bacteria are very similar to mitochondria. And in fact, mitochondria are probably bacteria that were kind of taken up by a cell when we first developed multicellular organisms. This is this theory of mitochondria that they are actually like engulfed bacteria. So it's no surprise then that bacteria respond to light and probably communicate via light too. They're emitting and receiving light in the form of biophotons. But certainly you can change your bacteria the more that you use light. And we know that mainly from again, animal studies where they can directly measure, easier the effect on the gut microbiome and light. But also there are some really good studies coming out now. And I think Anne Lieber too is doing some studies on Parkinson's where you have a specific microbiome profile and then you use red light and you're able to kind of almost revert or certainly move towards a more healthy bacteria profile. So yes, shining that, whether or not you're directly targeting the microbiome, or whether you're just healing those gap junctions within the gut wall so that you have a nicer environment for the good bacteria to proliferate, we're not sure yet. I think in humans, it makes more sense to think that we're actually making a better environment in the gut by healing the gut. In rodents, we've got such a small way to go with these lasers and things that we're using. You're probably directly affecting the actual bacteria. But certainly bacteria, when they're taken out of the body, will respond to light in quite amazing ways. And so, yes, I think this is going to be a growing field, photobiomics, where people really start to understand the interaction between bacteria and light.
Do you think, for example, if we're gonna take the belly band and you're gonna use it, do you think you could use, like, I'm a quantum nutritionist. I see a lot of leaky gut. That's such a pop. I do a lot of testing on food sensitivities and whether or not you believe in that science or not. There's something going on, with these gap junctions. And do you think we could use it, that belly band, for that? Like, just maybe to heal leaky gut syndrome? Do you think?
Definitely, because red light, we already know, is for wound healing. It's that the FDA and everybody recognizes that because there's so much data. I mean,
Yes.
sure, for wound healing, and red light therapy is used even in hospitals already. So you're getting that light fairly deep into the gut. You're definitely like sealing up those gap junctions. And then you're reducing inflammation because you're not getting the metabolites from the bacteria going into the blood. You're not getting food particles passing through the gap junctions into the blood. So you're reducing inflammation. So that's probably one of the main ways that red light therapy has its effect, actually, is by reducing inflammation, by kind of sealing up the gut and other places in the body, like, the wounds, reducing the cytokines and everything else that we have. So yeah, I think probably when people start using these devices, that's where people first experience the effect, is in the gut, and by clearing up leaky gut, which is probably responsible for so many of our brain conditions. We're just not, we're kind of thinking, I need to work on my memory. We don't think, is it my leaky gut doing that? But actually, once you treat the gut, a lot of the times these brain conditions just go.
It's exciting because you think, well, if people could heal the gut, they could maybe prevent Parkinson's or prevent Alzheimer's, right?
Definitely.
Just go after the gut. Yeah.
After the gut, if your gut is happy, and you've got low inflammation because you've got you haven't got leaky gut, you probably, the rest of the stuff is easy. It's just healing the gut first, I think, is crucial for any chronic illness.
Right. But I guess when you get to the point where you now have a neurological condition, you can't just do the gut, right? No, you got to do the brain.
It's beneficial to do the brain at the same time because you have this bio-directional communication. The brain is also telling the gut. People with IBS, a lot of the times they're just very stressed out. And so the brain is sending messages to the gut. There's danger. Stop processing food. Let's get ready to run or fight or whatever we need to do. So you have a bio-directional thing. So you really need to do both at the same time. But certainly by healing the gut and by giving the brain those messages to kind of chill, it's time to heal, you're getting it from both directions. And to me, that's optimizing. You're kind of optimizing your chances of getting better quicker.
Now, here's something. A lot of these red light panels that we have, they can have a little bit of electromagnetic radiation. We do tend to keep them a distance from the body, but with the belly band, this is obviously battery operated. Is it? Okay. So we're not worried about the electromagnetic radiation, and it's flush to the belly and obviously to the head. Is there more of a benefit to that light being flush? Like, and one of the reasons I'm asking is because I did hear an anecdotal story with the belly band from a naturopath who said they actually had parasites they come out, and they used red light panels, and nothing has ever caused this. She was thrilled with this healing response. It was a little upsetting at first. It was like irritable bowel initially, and she was like, oh no, what have I done? But then things came out, and then she had a healing response. So I was just curious, with why is it we need it to be flush for that kind of deeper effect?
Well, light is like an arrow. Light goes in a straight line. So imagine it almost like kind of marbles shooting out of a gun or something. You need the angle of penetration is really important with light therapy. The body is contoured. If you're standing against a panel and you're kind of glowing red, that's light that's coming off you. That's light that could have been going in you if you had the right angle, but it's bouncing off you, because light will bounce all over the place. We have square walls. I've got the window open here. The light is coming in and bouncing off of all these surfaces in a straight line. So really what you need is something that contours to the body and goes flush to the body, so that the photons are actually penetrating the body in a way that the body can absorb it. So that, I think, is a crucial thing. Have something flush to your body and have it contoured exactly to your body. Then you're getting the full dose of light. You will still get some of the light with the panels, but you just won't get as much.
Now let's take it to the knee. I think I actually fractured my tibia the day before we were supposed to talk a few months ago, and we had to postpone. And so I did hear an anecdotal story of someone who used the pen, that they just decided they had pain in their knee and decided to put it on the knee, and the next thing you know, they could cycle whatever 10 or 15 more miles without inflammation, and they were bone on bone in their knee joint. Are you seeing that are people taking this, having the same thought? Oh, if it works as well on the belly, that whole idea of contouring on a knee, like.
Well, also when you think about it, because it's a pad that wraps round, so your knee and your elbows and all these other joints are much smaller. So you can actually get it right round. So you can almost get like a 360. Then you have all the beams of light converging on a center point, which is your joint in the middle. So by having something that kind of squashes around the joints, you're able to really target deep into the joint. So, I mean, I'm all about the brain. Like you said, I'm a brain health obsessive. I kind of just thinking about the brain. So my device is totally designed just with the brain in mind and the gut.
Right.
I mean, these devices are approved for pain relief. So there's no reason why you can't. I mean, the other day I did a similar thing. I bust my knee. I was doing squats, obviously poorly, and I hurt my knee. And I just used it to heal my knee. I'm kind of traveling a lot. I need to be mobile. And I just wrapped it around my knee, every day for a few days until the pain went away. So you can kind of mix and match how you use these devices. It's the same therapy, it's just the application. So I'm talking about gut brain. There's no reason, somebody else might have this device and say it's, for joint pain. It really isn't so much the light, it's more the delivery mechanism that makes the difference between these devices. Some devices are kind of built to be more suitable for different things, like the face masks look like your face. They're kind of for different things, but the light is similar.
Okay, super. Okay, we're almost there. Oh, I wanted to ask, traumatic brain injury and stroke, are those conditions, is there research with that? And can you see that being used with CeraThrive?
There is a lot of, yes, there is a lot of data. There's a lady called Dr. Margaret Naser who does a lot of studies with the Veterans Association, and she particularly looks at TBI. She's also done a study on stroke, and she's done a study on whether the stroke is kind of deep stroke or surface level stroke. Okay. She does also children with brain injury. And so there is a lot of data. I would like to get a device in the hands of the people who are doing this research. It's not my main focus, but certainly I am looking to get it in the hands of those people. And even like UFC, which is like the fighters, prevention of illness and also concussive injury.
Yes.
I mean, I don't have data on that on my own device, but there is a lot of data out there on TBIs and stroke specifically.
And now it's making me wonder about autism.
Autism is another one where there is a lot of data. And at the same event where I was telling you that I went in London, there was a lot of people who were studying autistic spectrum disorder, because it responds very well. And the children who have quite severe autism, who are maybe not able to do other therapies, they can very simply put a band on or do these kinds of therapies. It's kind of non-invasive, it's easy, it's not threatening. And they're getting some great results with behaviors and mood and sleep, mainly in autistic spectrum. A brilliant study going on in Mexico. I think I remember some lady presented, she was getting fabulous data. So yeah, and for children, it's totally safe. It's just light.
Just light. Yeah. And Dia, I think I've exhausted my questions. Do you have any that I've missed or anything
I've
you
been
want?
just asking as they've come to me. You did a great job covering everything we wanted Sarah to talk about. And
Is there anything more? Yeah, I guess for Sarah, is there anything that we haven't asked you about?
No, I think we did a very comprehensive session there. Thank you. No, it was great.
One was you're
Go ahead.
doing research yourself with the University of Durham, is that right?
I'm partnering with Durham, Professor Paul Chazot, who's a very seasoned researcher into PBM. I'm going to be doing some studies with him, which he will be supervising. I won't be involved in the studies, but yes, he's going to be taking on the device, and he's already started some small scale case studies, but we have some big plans in the pipeline.
That's so exciting.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're near the end here. So we wanted to ask you our signature question, which is, what does quantum healthy mean to you?
And quantum healthy means kind of integrating these concepts of physics into health. So for me, it kind of when we talk about quantum health, it's trying to think of things in this kind of rather strange and abstract way. Like quantum biology is weird. It's the whole concept of quantum physics is so abstract and so not how we're living our lives. If you kind of dive into quantum biology, and quantum physics, time's not a constant, space isn't a constant, you really do have to kind of bend your brain to think about it. So I think with quantum healthy, the way it's trying to think a little bit differently about your health, and not getting stuck in this kind of linear way of thinking. We're more like kind of nested information that's and energy that's kind of doing different things at different times, and we have an interaction with our environment. We're not separate from our environment. We're kind of traveling through space and time, but it's kind of not totally set. So for me, it's about kind of being a little bit looser about the concept of health and trying to think a bit strangely about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful answer. It's helping people think outside the box and not in such a, dichotomous thinking or stuck in that just all or nothing thinking. Yeah, we do have to be open to new ideas and the fact that this stuff works. And the things they might have complicated explanations, some of which we went over today, but at the end of the day, it's a simple action, which is what I love about quantum biology and quantum physics. So
yeah, at the end of the day, we're just talking about sunlight. We're talking about the fact that we don't really see enough sunlight and we need to substitute with light. We kind of make it complicated by going all granular into what's going on, because as humans, we want to know. But actually, from a very simplistic point of view, it's just live closer that you can to a kind of a more natural way of living. And that's it, really. That's kind of the basic message.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how does one find CeraThrive? How do you have a website, or people, if they want to find you and ask you questions?
Yeah, so it's CeraThrive, like you say, it's spelt like the brain way. So it's CERA, CeraThrive, like cerebellum or cerebral. And everything comes to me. So everything CeraThrive, I've got LinkedIn, I've got all of these social channels. And if you message me, that will get, and you ask me specifically, message for Sarah, that will get to me, and I do answer all of those questions. So if anybody wants to get hold of me, let's say I'm on LinkedIn, Sarah Turner, CeraThrive, very happy to answer any questions at all.
I guess I would finish by just thanking you for being the rebel scientist that you are, and really be very simply to say thank you for your quest to bring light to the brain.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to talk to you too. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you so much. And for everybody listening, thank you so much for listening. And both Laura and I will have a discount for you in the show notes. So please do click on that and have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakismanwellness.com and Ndia at ndiaray.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.